They say blood is thicker than water, that family stands by family no matter what storms arrive. But sometimes the cruelest betrayals come not from strangers in shadowed alleys, but from those who share your last name, your childhood memories, your parents' eyes. Sometimes the person who wants to destroy you wore matching pajamas with you on Christmas morning, built blanket forts with you on rainy afternoons, and promised in whispered confidences that she would always have your back. And sometimes, the moment you've been quietly preparing for the moment when arrogance collides with reality arrives on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a sunlit lobby that smells faintly of lemon polish and old money. What would you do if your own sister publicly humiliated you, never suspecting you held all the power? The building stood on the corner of Madison and 73rd, a pre-war structure with limestone facade and brass fixtures that caught the afternoon light like captured fire. 8 stories of elegant apartments, ground-floor retail spaces occupied by a boutique wine shop, and an artisanal bakery that charged $14 for a loaf of sourdough. The kind of building where doormen knew your name and your coffee order, where the elevator had polished mahogany paneling and a small velvet bench for tired feet, where the lobby floor was Italian marble that echoed footsteps like whispered secrets. It was the sort of address that appeared on wedding invitations and business cards as a quiet assertion of arrival, of having made it, of belonging to a rarefied world where money moved silently and power wore cashmere. What no one knew, what carefully maintained LLCs and discreet property management companies ensured remained obscure, was that the building belonged entirely to me. Not a condo, not a rental unit. The entire structure, from the brass mailboxes in the lobby to the water tanks on the roof, from the bakery's lease agreement to the penthouse with its terrace garden. I had purchased it 18 months earlier, quietly, through channels that left no obvious trail back to my name. The tenants paid rent to a management company. The management company reported to a holding corporation. The holding corporation answered to me. It was an architecture of anonymity I had constructed deliberately, brick by financial brick, for reasons that were about to become devastatingly clear. My sister Claire had always possessed a particular talent for cruelty disguised as concern. Growing up, she had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, the well-timed observation that landed like a knife between the ribs. "That dress is so brave on you, I could never wear something that attention-grabbing. You're so lucky you don't care what people think about your career choices. It must be so freeing to just not worry about keeping up." Our mother called it honesty. Our father called it Claire being Claire. I called it what it was, a systematic campaign to establish hierarchy, to ensure that in the family narrative she occupied the position of successful daughter, while I played the role of the struggling, slightly pitiful younger sister who made questionable choices and never quite measured up. The truth was more complicated, as truth often is. Claire worked in marketing for a mid-tier pharmaceutical company, pulling in a respectable salary that afforded her a nice apartment in Brooklyn and yearly vacations to places she could photograph for social media. She drove a leased BMW and wore designer labels purchased during sample sales, carried the right handbag, and knew the right restaurants. She had built a life that looked successful from the outside, that photographed well, that fit neatly into the narrative of the accomplished daughter. I, on the other hand, had spent my 20s living in a studio apartment in Queens, wearing thrifted clothes, taking the subway everywhere, eating bodega sandwiches for dinner. I worked in tech back-end systems architecture, the kind of work that doesn't make for cocktail party conversation, that sounds vaguely boring when explained to relatives. While Claire posted glossy brunch photos, I posted nothing. While she attended gallery openings and charity galas, I sat in front of multiple monitors, writing code and building systems. To the casual observer, to family members who measured success by visible markers, I was the daughter who hadn't quite figured it out yet, who was still struggling while her older sister thrived. What they didn't know, what I had never bothered to explain because the people who mattered already understood, was that the unglamorous tech work had made me quietly, substantially wealthy. Not influencer wealthy, not even executive wealthy, but early equity in a company that went public wealthy. The kind of wealth that arrives suddenly and sits in your bank account like a surreal joke, like monopoly money that somehow became real. The kind of wealth that gives you options, that lets you purchase an entire building in Manhattan without taking out a mortgage. That renders you essentially untouchable while you continue to live in your modest apartment and ride the subway because those things are comfortable and familiar, and you've never particularly cared about impressing anyone. I had told my parents, of course, in a quiet conversation over coffee in their kitchen. They had been stunned, then proud, then concerned about whether I was managing the money wisely. I had shown them the investment portfolios, the property holdings, the trust accounts I had established for their retirement. They had wept and hugged me and asked me not to let this change me. I promised it wouldn't. And I had kept that promise, continuing to live simply, continuing to work because I loved the work, continuing to let the world assume whatever it wanted to assume about my bank account. Claire, however, I had not told. This omission was deliberate. I had watched her too many years, had been on the receiving end of her casual cruelty too many times, had seen how she weaponized information and relationships and family dynamics to maintain her position at the top of our small sibling hierarchy. Some instinct call it self-preservation, call it strategy, call it a deep understanding of exactly who my sister was beneath the designer clothes, and practiced smile had kept me silent. And as months passed and her comments grew sharper, as her public diminishments of me became more frequent and more cutting, I had realized that this silence was not just protection, it was preparation. The family gathering had been Claire's idea, naturally. Our parents' 40th wedding anniversary, an occasion that demanded celebration. Claire had volunteered to organize everything, had chosen the venue, a private event space in Manhattan that she assured everyone was absolutely the place right now, very exclusive, and had handled all the arrangements. She had sent detailed emails about dress code and timing and the guest list that included aunts and uncles and family friends, people who had known us since childhood. The event space, it turned out, was located on the top floor of a building on Madison and 73rd. My building, though Claire had no idea of this fact when she booked it. When I received the invitation with the address, I had stared at it for a long moment in my kitchen, a smile slowly spreading across my face. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony, or perhaps it was justice. Or perhaps it was simply the mathematical probability that in a city of finite event spaces and infinite human blindness, sometimes the perfect stage for revelation constructs itself without any conscious orchestration. I had informed my building manager that my family would be using the 8th floor event space, and that under no circumstances was my ownership of the building to be mentioned unless I specifically brought it up. She had understood immediately Margaret had worked in high-end property management for 30 years and had seen every variety of family drama unfold in lobbies and hallways and penthouse apartments. Not a word, she had promised, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Though, I have to say, I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out. The day of the anniversary party arrived with that particular crystalline quality of early autumn in New York, when the light turns golden and the air carries just a hint of coming cold. I dressed simply a black dress I had owned for years, comfortable shoes, minimal jewelry. Claire had sent 3 reminder emails about dress code, each one more pointed than the last, including a final note that read, "Remember, this is a formal event at a nice venue. Please make an effort to look presentable. I know you don't usually attend these kinds of places, but try to dress appropriately." I had read that email twice, each word a small cut, a small reminder of exactly how Claire saw me. Struggling, unfamiliar with nice places, in need of guidance to avoid embarrassing the family. The old version of me, the younger sister who had absorbed these comments like blows and internalized them as truths, might have felt the hot sting of shame. But that version of me had been replaced by someone who knew exactly what she owned, exactly what power looked like, exactly what was about to unfold. I arrived at the building at precisely 6 o'clock, as specified in Claire's invitation. The evening doorman, Marcus, recognized me immediately and opened the brass-trimmed door with a slight smile. "Good evening, Miss Chen," he said quietly. "Your family is gathering upstairs. The event space looks beautiful." "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, and the small exchange felt like shared conspiracy, like we were both actors in a play whose final act was about to begin. The elevator carried me smoothly upward, and I watched the floor numbers illuminate one by one, feeling my heartbeat steady and calm. No nervousness, no anxiety. Just a clear, bright sense of inevitability, of wheels turning that had been set in motion months and years ago by Claire herself. By every cutting comment and public humiliation, by every moment she had chosen cruelty over kindness and superiority over solidarity. The eighth-floor event space was indeed beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Hardwood floors that glowed like honey in the slanting sunlight. Round tables dressed in ivory linens with centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus. My parents stood near the windows, dressed elegantly, my mother in navy silk and my father in a gray suit. Aunts and uncles clustered in small conversational groups, glasses of champagne already in hand. And there, at the center of it all, was Claire. She wore a dress that had probably cost more than my monthly rent used to cost, a deep emerald that set off her carefully highlighted hair. Her makeup was professional grade, her heels were designer, her jewelry was statement without being gaudy. She looked successful, polished, like a woman who knew exactly where she belonged, and that place was at the top. She was holding court with a group of relatives, her voice carrying across the space with that particular projection of someone accustomed to being heard. "Ridiculous, honestly," she was saying as I approached, her tone light but edged with contempt. "I invited her, of course, because she's family, but I have no idea if she'll actually come. You know how she is. Probably couldn't afford the subway fare." Laughter rippled through the group, uncertain. The kind of laughter people offer when they're not sure if a comment is a joke or genuine meanness but don't want to seem unsophisticated by not getting it. I stepped into the circle, and Claire's eyes landed on me. "Oh," she said, her voice bright and sharp. "You made it. How wonderful. And you're only—" She glanced at her phone. 3 minutes late. That's practically early for you." "The elevator was very efficient," I said calmly, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. "Everything looks lovely, Claire. You did a beautiful job with the arrangements." "Well, someone had to," she said. And there it was, the implication that I could not have been trusted with such responsibilities, that organizational competence was beyond my capabilities. "I know you're not really familiar with planning events at this level, so I just handled everything myself. It's fine. Not everyone has experience with high-end venues." Our Aunt Susan, ever the peacemaker, interjected. "Both my nieces are so accomplished in their own ways. We're so proud of you both." Claire's smile was indulgent, patronizing. "Of course," she said. "We all have different definitions of accomplishment. I mean, I'm sure whatever it is you do with computers is very fulfilling for you, even if it doesn't pay much. Money isn't everything, right?" The comment hung in the air like smoke. Around us, relatives shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their champagne or the view from the windows. This was familiar territory, Claire establishing dominance, Claire putting me in my place, Claire ensuring everyone understood the hierarchy, and always with that smile, that light tone that gave her deniability, that let her claim later that she was just joking, just teasing, just engaging in the kind of sibling banter that all families share. "Money certainly isn't everything," I agreed, taking a small sip of champagne. It was excellent champagne. I noted Claire had indeed spared no expense for the event. "Though it does afford certain opportunities." "Exactly," Claire said, warming to her theme now, encouraged by my apparent agreement. "Which is why I'm happy to treat tonight. I know things are tight for you, so don't even think about trying to contribute to the costs. I've got it covered. That's what successful sisters are for, right? Helping out family members who are less fortunate." Less fortunate. The words landed precisely where she intended them. A laser-guided strike designed to establish her generosity and my dependency in front of our entire extended family. I saw my mother frown, saw my father start to move forward, but I caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of my head. "Not yet." "That's very generous," I said. "The venue alone must have been expensive. What did they charge you for the space?" Claire waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I negotiated a good rate. 3,500 for the evening. Practically a steal for a place like this." "Of course, you wouldn't know." And here her voice took on that particular tone of patient explanation, as if speaking to a child. "But event spaces in Manhattan at this level typically run 5,000 to 7,000. I used my corporate connections to get us a discount." It pays to have a real career with networking opportunities. $3,500. I knew for a fact that the standard rate for the space was $2,800, which meant either Claire was inflating the price to seem more impressive, or the event coordinator had seen her coming and added a premium for dealing with someone clearly high maintenance. Either way, she was using the cost as a weapon, as another way to establish her financial superiority, her capability, her position as the successful daughter. Your corporate connections are certainly valuable, I said. This space is perfect for the occasion. Have you used this building for other events? Oh, a few times, Claire said airily. I know the management company. They love working with me because I'm professional and I understand how these things work. Not like some people who would probably show up in jeans and try to negotiate down the price like it's a garage sale. More laughter, more uncomfortable shifting. My Uncle Robert attempted to change the subject, asking my father about his recent golf game, but Claire was on a roll now, energized by the audience, by the champagne, by the gleaming space around us that she believed reflected her status and success. You know what's funny, she continued, turning to address the broader group, is that our parents always told us we could be anything we wanted. And I looked around and I thought, okay, I want success. I want a real career. I want to be able to afford nice things and live well and not have to worry about money. And I worked for it, you know? I networked and I climbed the corporate ladder and I made smart choices. While some people, her eyes flicked to me, decided to just coast along, doing whatever weird computer stuff that no one understands, living in some tiny apartment in Queens, wearing the same clothes from years ago. Her gaze raked over my dress, and her smile sharpened. Is that the same dress you wore to Uncle Mike's funeral? 3 years ago? It was, in fact, the same dress. I had bought it because it was well-made and versatile, and I liked it. The idea that I should constantly purchase new clothing to prove financial viability had always struck me as performative and wasteful. But Claire wasn't interested in my philosophy of consumption. She was interested in the kill. It's a classic style, I said. It's sad, Claire countered, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. It's genuinely sad that you can't afford to buy yourself something new for our parents' 40th anniversary. You know what? After this is over, you and I should go shopping. My treat. I'll buy you something nice, something that doesn't scream, I shop at Goodwill. Would you like that? Would that help? The offer was designed to be public, to be witnessed, to establish beyond any doubt that Claire was the benefactor and I was the charity case. Around us, I could feel the discomfort escalating. Aunt Susan looked near tears. Uncle Robert was studying his shoes. My mother had gone pale, and my father's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping. They knew this was wrong, knew this had crossed from sibling teasing into something uglier. But the social contract of family gatherings held them frozen, uncertain how to intervene without causing a scene that might ruin the celebration. But I was not frozen. I had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it, understanding with perfect clarity that Claire would not be able to resist the opportunity to publicly establish her superiority in a venue she considered her territory, surrounded by family witnesses who could carry the story forward into holiday dinners and future gatherings. This was her stage, her moment, her crowning achievement of sibling dominance. Except it wasn't her stage at all. That's incredibly kind of you to offer, I said, my voice still calm, still measured. But before we make plans, I should probably tell you something about this building. What about it? Claire asked, already dismissive, already moving on to greet a late-arriving cousin. I own it. The words were quiet, almost conversational. For a moment, they seemed to simply hang in the air, not quite landing, not quite processing. Claire turned back to me, her expression confused, as if I had spoken in a foreign language. What? The building, I repeated, more clearly now, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent space. This building, the one we're standing in, Madison and 73rd. 8 stories, 12 residential units, 2 commercial spaces. I own it. All of it. Claire's laugh was reflexive, nervous. That's not funny. It's not a joke. I pulled out my phone, navigated to a folder I had prepared for exactly this moment, and turned the screen toward her. Purchase documents. deed transfer records, property tax payments, all showing ownership under DCC Holdings, LLC, which stands for Diana Chen Company, in case you were wondering. I bought it 18 months ago. The color was draining from Claire's face now. A slow fade like watching a photograph bleach in sunlight. She reached for my phone, but her hand was shaking. You couldn't possibly. The management company you think you have such a great relationship with? I continued, my voice still gentle, still calm, still absolutely relentless. They work for me. The event coordinator who booked you this space and charged you $3,500 for an evening? She works for me. The doorman who greeted you when you arrived to scout the venue? He works for me. Marcus, downstairs at the entrance? He's worked for me since I purchased the property. This entire building, Claire, every brick, every window, every polished inch of marble in the lobby belongs to me. The silence in the room had weight now, had texture. Every relative, every family friend, every person who had witnessed Claire's systematic humiliation of me was now witnessing something else entirely, the complete and total collapse of the narrative she had constructed. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Her hand still held her champagne glass, but the glass was tilting dangerously, the liquid threatening to spill onto her expensive dress. My father moved first, crossing to me with an expression of mingled pride and concern. Diana, sweetheart, is this true? Completely true, I said, accepting his hug. I'm sorry I didn't mention it before. I wanted to keep it quiet. You own this building, my mother said, her voice filled with wonder. You actually own this entire building. Among other properties, I admitted. But this is my favorite. Good location, solid structure, excellent tenants. Claire had found her voice, though it emerged strangled, desperate. You're lying. This is some kind of sick joke because you're jealous of me. Because you can't stand that I'm successful and you're not. Margaret, I called out, not loudly, but with the calm authority of someone who knows she will be heard and obeyed. The event coordinator appeared immediately from wherever she had been tactfully waiting, her professional smile in place. Yes, Miss Chen? Could you please explain to my sister the ownership structure of this building? Margaret's smile widened just slightly, and I caught the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. She had been on the receiving end of Claire's demanding attitude during the event planning. I knew the sharp emails, the imperious tone, the treatment of service workers as lesser beings. Of course, she said smoothly. This property is owned entirely by DCC Holdings, LLC, which is the privately held company of Miss Diana Chen. I've had the pleasure of working for Miss Chen since she acquired the property 18 months ago. She's an excellent landlord, very fair, very professional. When you booked this space, Miss Claire Chen, I did inform my supervisor, who informed Miss Chen, who graciously approved the booking and requested that we provide excellent service for her family's celebration. You knew? Claire turned on me, her voice rising now, cracking. You knew I was booking this space and you didn't say anything? You didn't ask, I said simply. You sent an email with the address and information about dress code and timing. You seem to have everything under control. I saw no reason to interfere with your planning. This is insane, Claire said, looking around the room wildly, seeking support, seeking someone who would validate her reality, who would confirm that this was impossible, that her struggling younger sister could not possibly own an entire building in Manhattan. But the faces looking back at her were not supportive. They were shocked, yes, and amazed, and some were openly delighted at the reversal. Aunt Susan was actually smiling. Uncle Robert was shaking his head in admiration. My parents stood together, holding hands, watching me with an expression I had never quite seen before, a mixture of pride and relief and a hint of vindication, as if they had always known but had been waiting patiently for the truth to emerge. How? Claire demanded, turning back to me. How could you possibly afford this? You work in tech support or something. You live in Queens. You shop at thrift stores. You can't even afford a new dress. None of this makes sense. I don't work in tech support, I said, my voice still patient, still measured, still absolutely in control of the moment. I'm a systems architect, specializing in back-end infrastructure. And I was employee number 12 at a startup that went public 4 years ago. My equity package was substantial. As for where I live and how I dress, Those are choices, Claire. I like my apartment. I like my clothes. I don't particularly enjoy spending money on things that don't matter to me. But that doesn't mean I don't have money. It just means I have different priorities than you do. You lied to me, Claire said. And now there were tears in her eyes, tears of humiliation and fury and the awful realization that everything she had built, every casual cruelty, every public diminishment, every carefully constructed moment of superiority had been built on a foundation of complete ignorance. I never lied, I corrected. You made assumptions. You decided that because I didn't perform wealth the way you think it should be performed, I must not have any. You decided that because I didn't brag about my job or my income or my investments, I must not have anything worth bragging about. You constructed an entire narrative about who I was and where I fit in our family hierarchy, and you never once asked me if that narrative was accurate. You just accepted it as truth because it served you, because it made you feel superior, because it gave you permission to treat me the way you've been treating me for years. I didn't, Claire started, but the protest died on her lips because we both knew it was pointless. Every person in that room had just witnessed her systematic attempt to humiliate me. Every cruel comment was still hanging in the air, still fresh in everyone's memory. My mother approached Claire, reaching for her hand, but Claire jerked away. Don't, she choked out. Just don't. You all knew, didn't you? Mom? Dad? You knew she had money, and you let me— She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the depth of her humiliation. We knew Diana was financially secure, my father said carefully. We didn't know the specifics of her holdings. And we certainly didn't tell you because Diana asked us not to, and we respect her privacy. But more than that, Claire, we hoped. His voice caught, roughened with disappointment. We hoped that how much money your sister had or didn't have wouldn't matter to you. We hoped you loved her regardless. We hoped you treated her with kindness and respect because she's your sister, not because of her bank balance. The words landed like stones, each one a small condemnation. Claire looked around the room one more time, seeking something escape, support, a way to salvage this, a way to rewind the last 15 minutes and make different choices. But there was no rewind available, no delete button, no way to unsay what had been said or undo what had been done. I can't be here, she whispered, and then she was moving toward the elevator, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood floor, her expensive dress rustling, her carefully constructed image crumbling with every desperate step. I didn't try to stop her. Neither did anyone else. We simply watched as she jabbed at the elevator button, as the brass doors opened, as she disappeared behind them. The doors slid closed with a soft, final whisper, and she was gone. The silence that followed her departure was different from the silence that had greeted my revelation. This was softer, contemplative, tinged with a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. My mother came to me first, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like her familiar perfume and felt like forgiveness for all the times she hadn't intervened, hadn't stopped Claire, hadn't protected me from the casual cruelties. I'm sorry, she murmured against my hair. I'm so sorry we let it go on so long. You have nothing to apologize for, I said, holding her tightly. This wasn't your doing. The party continued, though the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. People approached me in small groups, asking questions about the building, about my work, about how I had managed to keep such a monumental secret. I answered patiently, graciously, aware that I was being rewritten in their minds, transformed from the struggling younger daughter to something else entirely, someone competent, someone successful, someone who had been vastly underestimated. Uncle Robert pulled me aside at one point, his eyes twinkling with mischief. I've got to say, kiddo, that was the most spectacular takedown I've ever witnessed. Your sister has been insufferable for years, and watching her realize she'd been patronizing someone who could buy and sell her entire life, he shook his head admiringly. That was poetry. It wasn't about taking her down, I said, though even as I spoke the words, I wondered if they were entirely true. It was about setting the record straight. Well, consider it thoroughly straightened, he said. And for what it's worth, I always liked you better anyway. As the evening wore on, as my parents were toasted and celebrated, As the champagne flowed and the city lights glittered beyond the windows, I found myself standing alone for a moment near those massive windows, looking out at Manhattan spreading in all directions, a grid of light and shadow and endless possibility. My phone had been buzzing periodically and my purse text messages from Claire, I assumed, though I hadn't checked them. There would be time later for those conversations, for whatever reconciliation or permanent rupture was coming. For now, I simply stood in the space I owned, in the building I had purchased, surrounded by family who finally saw me clearly. Margaret approached with a fresh glass of champagne. "Quite an evening," she said quietly. "Indeed," I agreed. "For what it's worth," she continued, "I've been in property management for 3 decades. I've seen every kind of person, every kind of family drama, every kind of situation you can imagine. And I've learned that how people treat service workers, how they treat anyone they perceive as beneath them, tells you everything you need to know about their character." She paused, glancing toward the elevator where Claire had disappeared. "Your sister was rude to every member of my staff. She snapped at the servers, complained about the florist, talked down to the valet. She treated people like props in her production." "And how do I treat your staff?" I asked, curious. Margaret smiled. "Like human beings. You know their names. You ask about their families. You tip generously and say thank you. That's why we were all delighted to see how this evening unfolded. Not because we're cruel, but because there's a certain satisfaction in watching people discover that kindness and respect matter more than performance, that quiet competence trumps loud arrogance every time." She left me there with those words, and I considered them as the party flowed around me, as my parents danced to music playing from hidden speakers, as relatives laughed and clinked glasses and celebrated 40 years of marriage. Perhaps Margaret was right. Perhaps this had never really been about money or buildings or who owned what. Perhaps it had always been about something simpler and more fundamental. The kind of person you choose to be when you think no one important is watching. Claire had chosen to be cruel when she thought she held all the power. She had chosen to humiliate and diminish and establish dominance through public mockery. And when the power dynamic revealed itself to be the opposite of what she had assumed, when the person she had been crushing turned out to be the person who literally owned the ground beneath her feet, the reversal had been devastating not because I had sought revenge, but because her own actions had condemned her in front of everyone who mattered. I hadn't needed to plot or plan or scheme. I had simply needed to exist, to live my life according to my own values, to let Claire's assumptions and arrogance build the trap she would eventually spring on herself. The building was almost incidental. It could have been anything, any revelation that shattered the narrative she had constructed. The power was in the truth, in the reality that she had never bothered to discover because she had been too invested in the fiction. My father joined me at the window, slipping his arm around my shoulders. "Your mother wants to know if Claire is coming back." "I don't think so," I said. "Not tonight, anyway." "This was hard to watch," he admitted. "Both of you are my daughters. I love you both. But Diana, what she said to you, how she treated you, that was unacceptable. It's been unacceptable for years, and we should have called it out sooner." We enabled her by staying silent. "She's going to be angry for a while," I said. "Humiliated. She might not forgive this." "Then that's her choice," my father said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. You lived your life with dignity and privacy. You didn't owe her access to your financial information, especially given how she would have used it either to compete or to ask for money or to find some other way to make it about her. What happened tonight happened because Claire made assumptions and then weaponized them. The consequences are hers to bear." We stood together in silence for a while, watching the city breathe and pulse beyond the glass. Eventually the party wound down. Guests departed with hugs and congratulations, and many pointed looks toward me that suggested the story of this evening would be repeated at family gatherings for years to come. My parents left with Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert, my mother still looking worried, my father proud and protective. Margaret supervised the cleanup with quiet efficiency, and as the servers cleared glasses and folded linens, I thanked each of them personally, adding a substantial bonus to their payment that would appear on their next paycheck. Finally, I was alone in the empty event space. The city lights, the only illumination. the silence profound after hours of conversation and music. I pulled out my phone and looked at the messages from Claire. There were 7 of them, progressing from fury to bargaining to something that might have been the beginning of self-awareness. "You're a vindictive bitch. How could you do that to me in front of everyone? You planned this. You planned to humiliate me. I'm your sister. Family is supposed to support each other. Why didn't you just tell me? I'm sorry if I said things that hurt you. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Can we talk?" I didn't respond. Not yet. There would be time for conversation, for processing, for whatever healing or distance was necessary. But tonight, in this moment, I simply stood in the space I owned and felt the weight of the evening settle around me like a coat that finally fit properly. Perhaps revenge is not really the right word for what had transpired. Revenge implies active malice, careful planning to inflict harm. I had not set out to harm Claire. I had simply protected myself by maintaining privacy, and then allowed the truth to emerge at a moment when it would be most illuminating not to punish her, but to finally, definitively establish reality. To show her and everyone else who had made assumptions about me that their assumptions were wrong, that I was not the person they had decided I was, that their narratives about my life bore no resemblance to my actual life. What Claire chose to do with that information, how she chose to respond to the collapse of her carefully constructed hierarchy, was up to her. I could not control her choices, could not force her to be kinder or more thoughtful or less concerned with appearances and status. I could only control myself, my own actions, my own values. And I had chosen to live quietly and well, to work hard and invest wisely, to treat people with respect regardless of their position, to measure my worth by my own internal metrics rather than external validation. The building around me felt solid, permanent, a physical manifestation of choices made over years, the choice to save rather than spend, to invest rather than consume, to value substance over style. These walls would stand long after tonight's drama faded into family legend. The marble floors would remain polished, the brass fixtures would continue to gleam, the tenants would pay rent and live their lives, and the building would persist as it had persisted through decades of previous owners, previous dramas, previous moments of human folly and revelation. I took the elevator down to the lobby, where Marcus was finishing his shift. He looked up as I emerged, and gave me that same slight smile. "Good night, Miss Chen. I hope the evening was everything you hoped for." "It was enlightening," I said, "for everyone involved." "I'm sure it was," he replied, and there was a world of understanding in those 4 words, the recognition that he had probably seen Claire's attitude during her venue scouting visit, had probably experienced her dismissive treatment, had probably known exactly what was coming when I walked in wearing my old dress and my quiet dignity. I walked out into the September night, the air cool now, the city settling into its late evening rhythm. The subway entrance was 2 blocks away, the familiar green globe marking the stairs down into the system that had carried me through this city for years. I could have called a car service, could have summoned a driver, could have performed wealth in the way Claire would have expected. But I chose the subway, chose the familiar, chose what was real and comfortable and mine. On the train heading back to Queens, to my modest apartment that I genuinely loved, I thought about Claire and wondered what she was feeling in whatever space she had retreated to. Shame, certainly. Anger, probably directed at me, but hopefully, eventually, directed at herself. Confusion about how she had so thoroughly misjudged the situation. And underneath all of that, perhaps hopefully, a tiny seed of recognition that the way she had been treating me was wrong, that cruelty is never justified, that kindness matters more than performance. But I couldn't know what she was thinking, couldn't control what conclusions she would draw from tonight's events. I could only know my own thoughts, feel my own feelings, which were surprisingly complex. Not triumph exactly, though there was an element of satisfaction in seeing the truth finally acknowledged. Not vindication, though being seen clearly after years of being misperceived did feel relieving. Mostly what I felt was a kind of quiet peace, a sense that something that had needed to happen had finally happened, that a festering wound had been opened and could now begin to heal, or if not heal, at least no longer poison everything around it. The subway rocked through the tunnel, and I watched my reflection in the dark window across from me. Same dress I'd worn for years. Same minimal jewelry. Same simple hair. Nothing about my external appearance had changed from the moment I walked into that party, but everything about how I would be perceived had shifted fundamentally. The struggling younger sister had been revealed as an illusion. A story Claire had told herself to feel superior, to justify her treatment of me, to maintain a hierarchy that had never actually existed. And perhaps that was the real lesson of the evening, the truth that extended far beyond one family's drama in one Manhattan building. We are all constantly making assumptions about other people based on incomplete information, on surface appearances, on our own need to categorize and rank and understand where we fit in the social architecture. We see someone's clothes or job title or living situation, and we construct an entire narrative about their worth, their success, their place in the world. And sometimes we're right, but often we're catastrophically wrong. And we don't discover our error until the moment when reality asserts itself and our careful narratives collapse. Claire had built her sense of self-worth on the foundation of being better than me, more successful, more sophisticated, more financially secure. And when that foundation crumbled, when she discovered it was built on sand and assumption and willful ignorance, everything she had constructed atop it became unstable. That instability was painful to witness, but it was necessary. You cannot build authentic relationships on false narratives. You cannot love people you don't actually see clearly. And you cannot treat people with genuine kindness if you're constantly evaluating them against your own need to feel superior. The train emerged from the tunnel into the elevated section, and Queens spread out below in a carpet of light. My neighborhood, my home, my choice. Tomorrow I would return to my work, to the code and systems that I found genuinely fascinating. I would continue to live simply, to find joy in small things, to measure my success by my own internal metrics. And eventually, when enough time had passed, Claire and I would have the conversation that was waiting for us, difficult, painful, perhaps ultimately healing, perhaps ultimately severing. But that was tomorrow's concern, next week's concern, the future's concern. Tonight, I simply rode the subway home, another passenger in a city of 8 million people, most of whom would never know that the woman in the old black dress owned an entire building in Manhattan, and all of whom had their own stories, their own secrets, their own moments when reality diverged sharply from appearance. The universe, I had learned, has a way of balancing itself. Not karma, exactly, not cosmic justice, but simply the mathematical certainty that truth eventually emerges, that assumptions eventually collide with reality, that the stories we tell ourselves about other people eventually meet the actual people underneath. And when that collision occurs, when the gap between assumption and reality reveals itself, the results can be devastating for those who built their worlds on false foundations. Claire would survive this. She was resilient, even if she was also cruel. She would process the humiliation, would tell herself a new story eventually, would find a way to rationalize or minimize or, perhaps optimistically, actually learn from what had happened. Our relationship would never be the same, that much was certain. But perhaps it had never been healthy to begin with. Perhaps what I had allowed, what I had tolerated for years, had been a kind of slow poison that needed to be purged before anything genuine could grow in its place. The subway stopped at my station, and I emerged into the familiar streets of my neighborhood, past the bodega where I bought my coffee, past the laundromat where I did my wash, past the small park where children played on weekends. Nothing here had changed. Nothing here would change. This was still my life, still my world, still my choice. The building in Manhattan was an asset, an investment, a testament to decisions made over years. But this neighborhood, this apartment, this quiet life was home. I climbed the 3 flights to my door, unlocked the deadbolt, stepped into the small space I had occupied for years. Studio apartment, single window looking out at the building across the street, kitchen barely big enough for one person, bathroom with the temperamental shower. By Claire's standards, by the standards of people who measured worth in square footage and amenities, this was failure. This was struggling. This was barely getting by. But by my standards, it was perfect. It was paid for. It was mine. And more importantly, it was enough. I changed out of the black dress, hung it carefully in the closet where it would wait for the next occasion that required formal wear. I washed my face, made tea, settled onto my couch with my laptop to check the system alerts from the servers I maintained. Normal evening routine, unchanged by the extraordinary events of the past few hours. The code still ran, the system still hummed, the work still waited. And out there, countless others wait for their own moment when arrogance meets accountability, when betrayal meets cleverness, when justice is served in ways money or status could never prevent.